All right. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me in the back? Yes, great. Hi, my name is Sabine, and I am here presenting on behalf of my co-authors from the Copenhagen Game Collective and as a faculty member of the University of Tampere in Finland. And this presentation is going to be about the process of designing the Undie Game, a collaborative two-player game using wearables and mouse controllers to facilitate an intimate, slightly silly experience. Originally, this presentation was intended as a video conference in homage to Doug Engelbart's showcase of the first mouse that was ever shown to the world in 1968. In what is now known as the mother of all demos. And we wanted to have the queer dads of all demos or something like that. But anyways, some of our reviewers found it much more interesting to have an update of this presentation, including a live demonstration in the flesh, so to speak, in an embodied way to kind of trace how far the mouse has come. Which is why half of this session will be a live demo of the Undie Game. So fair warning to everyone, it is totally okay if that is too much for you, especially in the front rows, that would be right into your face. But I'm pleased to say that I found two volunteers, wonderful people who will help me demonstrate this game later on. So what is the Undie Game actually? The Undie Game is a game for two players who wear a mouse controller inside a pair of pants on their bodies and collectively steer a 3D tongue on screen to help it lick up good stuff while avoiding bad stuff. So there's a gameplay challenge. It's a real game. And the preferences of what counts as good stuff and bad stuff are decided on an algorithmic basis. So the tongue and its preferences changes across gameplay sessions. So our interest was in speculating, the interest in the paper was in speculating about how standard game hardware can be used to explore pleasures beyond the gaming mainstream. And this included reframing the affordances of hardware features such as the mouse wheel. The Undie Game uses the mouse wheel suggestively in terms of a kind of organ, a clitoris of sorts, which can be scrolled by the player to stimulate a character on screen and to stimulate new versions of gameplay fun. In the paper, we talk about this reframing of the standard hardware in terms of queering. A process of breaking with normative assumptions about technology by actively finding new potential uses for it. The notion of queering has previously been used in HCI for example, by Anne Light, whose enlightening work has argued that technology design can be a practice of queering if it, and I quote, problematizes apparently structural and foundational relationships with critical intent. This may be expressed through tactics like mischief, clowning, and also more serious critique. You already kind of figured out on which end of the spectrum the Undie Game will be. So the question we asked in the paper is, how can game design be a queer tactic to resist the status quo of hardware design? And more specifically, how does the Undie Game use queer tactics in its design to resist a status quo of the mouse? But what is the status quo of the mouse? So within game culture studies, this status quo of technology has sometimes been referred to as the hegemony of play. So basically, the hegemony of play is a cluster of design principles for playful technologies which have advantaged some forms of play while marginalizing others. And not only has this hegemony of play produced stereotypical ideas of the gamer, a white male basement dweller with poor social abilities and a preference for killing things on screens or trolling the forums while downing energy drinks. It's also ignoring the needs and desires of quote-unquote minority players who are in fact the majority of the population. So we observe that the mouse has become part of this hegemony of play by default by means of being framed through marketing discourses by presenting limited ideas about masculinity, which I tend to call the toxic gamer masculinity, which is one of the few puns that has not made it into the paper, so this is why it needs to take up some slide space. So especially within hardware sales, the mouse is dominantly staged as a hyper-masculine performance equipment sold under such well-sounding names as Death Adder Elite, Pulse Fire Surge, and Blaster X Siege M04. Heavily gendered monikers which suggest that mice are still marketed to a cis male gamer demographic. So, three queer design factors, and then we move on to the live demonstration. Three tactics which speculate about different ways of perceiving fun and pleasure. So, factor one for us was the design choice to use wearables to attach the mouse to panties and thereby recontextualize the mouse for play. So the mouse is relocated from the usual space on the desk away from your body onto your body, and this relocation introduces the need for consent, right? So the player needs to make a decision how far they want to go in wearing and touching the hardware. And because in order to touch the mouse, the player also touches themselves. And they do so in a social context together with another player and perhaps in front of a curious audience. I'd like to stress that rather than a fixed moment in time, consent is a process that starts with the player's selection of the undies and continues with negotiations of how to wear and touch the controllers, what body posture to take during play, whether the players look each other in the eyes, how much the players like to talk about what is happening on screen, and so on. Factor two, we observed that while designing the Undie Game, part of the potential pleasure might be derived from failure. The failure of our design, in fact. So moments in which the game didn't work as intended, where the game failed to communicate to players efficiently or even refused to work due to very fascinating bugs. For instance, the players aren't told by the game who controls the tongue horizontally and who controls the tongue vertically. And we realized that this moment of uncertainty is coherent with the overall challenge of the game to find out how the hell this clitoris works. Another example is that while technology has been, our technology in the game has been optimized to make the tongue look fleshy and smooth and juicy, sometimes it stiffens and gets stuck. So in this case, the players must let go and let the tongue relax a little bit until they continue. And these things must be explored through trial and error. Finding out what the tongue is like, how the players relate to it, what the tongue actually likes, and so on. Factor three, ambiguity. This is the third factor, which went into design and is kind of the celebration of ambiguity as a design resource. As you could tell, we didn't hold back on suggesting that the mouse can actually become a sexual organ of some kind, and the articulation of mouse, lingerie, and the scroll wheel interaction supports these meanings. But while it's easy to read the Undie Game as evocative of sexual interaction, some kind of masturbation, it is not mandatory for the players to embrace these meanings. It's not mandatory. The tongue in the game could could mean anything. Is it maybe a third character? Is it maybe a play buddy? Is it maybe it represents some more transcendental feeling of connection between the players? Who knows? These are open for negotiation. And these are also some questions that I would invite you to think about while you watch the live demonstration of the Undie Game taking place in front of your eyes. And I encourage you to ask one question in particular. What happens to play when standard hardware is queered in that way? Thank you very much so far. And I would ask the wonderful volunteers to come up on stage and select their undies. I also have no idea which is the horizontal and the vertical. Could you come a bit forward so the stream can capture your performance?
Entirely not awkward. Seeing as the room is so full, if you already have questions, please signal either the SV or you might stand up to the left of me, and then so that we can quickly facilitate that. Okay, it wasn't as funny.
Oh, I guess I need to plug in the sound. Keep holding. You have to keep holding. Right. Good job. Good. Any questions?
Hello. My name is Annika Werner. I'm from Uppsala. So I enjoy this design. I enjoy the talk. But I'm wondering about why you call this a queered game rather than a brink game. A brink game. So brink games have been discussed in literature as the games where you cannot completely disconnect from the meaning in one way or another. Sex games tend to be brink games in general. But they're basically the games where you say, come on, it's just a game. The ones where you have the gaming as an excuse to explore something that's on the brink. So for me, this is just another brink sex game, rather than a queered game. So I'm wondering why you're using the terminology of queered in this context.
So first of all, thank you so much for this suggestion of the brink game. I was not at all familiar with this terminology, so I will look into it. And that might also help me identify exactly the nuances of what different angles on that process, which brings me to the choice of why we use queer as a discussion sort of lens. For me, it seemed to be a wow. Yeah, that answered everything. As an angle to look at the process of engaging with standard hardware. So it's more this investigation of something that has been normalized in the overall landscape of gaming, a kind of normative way of treating the mouse, as I briefly mentioned, away from the body, as something that is very rational, is rationalized, has this rationalized discourse that is paradoxically very emotionally charged, as a gendered kind of like stereotypical hardware. So I think the label queer or queering, or rather, as a process, has helped me reflect on the ability of this process to challenge the norm.
Thank you. It's an excellent answer.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, hi. Danielle Wild, University of Southern Denmark. This was really great for a number of reasons, but I also want to come with a different kind of challenge for you. My area of expertise is embodied design and embodied engagement. And I really love the way you're speaking about this, but what I did notice specifically is that your two volunteers in playing the game were operating it in many regards as if it was a mouse attached to their body, that they perhaps had limited ways of moving it around because it was stuck to their body as the table surface or whatever that they would normally move a mouse around on, but they were using their hands on it as if they were, operating a little rolly thing on their mouse from where I could see. But as you were presenting it, what I was imagining was that someone would put it on and it would be a hands-free engagement through their underpants to control a tongue.
That is excellent.
And so the challenge I come to you with is perhaps to open up the way that you are thinking about how a mouse could be used. If you're querying the mouse, how do you really take it further and not just reposition the mouse and the movability of reposition the mouse onto an intimate part of the body or any part of the body, and therefore challenge the mouse's movability and actually, queer the whole notion of the controller.
Thank you so much. And I don't regard this as a challenge at all. I love this answer or this question or this opportunity to think about it, because this game only goes so far in challenging the norm. There's still a hand using the mouse in this kind of like stereotypical way. There's still some features that are not queer in the game. I've been thinking about the possibility, for instance, using the mouse on while seated with your body rolling maybe around and clicking while rolling around on a chair kind of construction. That would be really exciting. So kind of like this whole embodiment of kind of challenging the whole control system really speaks to me. again, I think this has clear limitation that you pointed to. So thanks for that.
If I can just add, I also found interesting. You're talking about masturbation, and you're talking about this kind of normative construct of gamers as the white male, who in fact is the minority rather than the majority of players. This particular kind of persona, white male persona, and yet you had two people who seem to identify as being men as your volunteers, which kind of takes away the possibility straight away of having more divergent amongst the two players, divergent possibilities for interacting with it. Because, I mean, if we go back to the sort of hands-free notion, I was sitting there and thinking, in my body, thinking, how could I move it? How could I control it? And I was kind of thinking through it with my body. And so I think that there are a lot of opportunities here where you can take the discourse and expand it through the physical exploration from it. But it's wonderful. Thank you.
Can we collaborate, please?
Absolutely.